We'll take you for a virtual ride on a Kawasaki KLR 650 2017 model in and around Hermiston, Oregon. Hermiston is a community of about 17,000, a little over 17,000 people, located on the east side in the northeast corner of Oregon, and north on Townsend Road. Love this bike. This is the second KLR 650 I've owned in the last 4 years. Put 34,000 miles on the first one, and I have about 5,000 on it now on the second one. We're headed out towards the diagonal road out of Hermiston going east. It's a good day for riding today in early February. Temperature is about 50 degrees. Now we're headed east towards the junction with Highway 730. Had to stop for an adjustment in the microphone. This is a ride to test a new remote microphone I have hooked to a GoPro 3 camera helmet mount. I think it's going to work pretty good. Here we're back on the diagonal road. Riding through some of the country I grew up in the 1950s. Back then the population of Hermiston was about 4,500 as opposed to over 17,000 now. It was a fairly vibrant community back in the 50s because there was a large military presence here and construction of hydroelectric dams on the Columbia River, which made for a lot of construction jobs. I grew up out here in the rural area off to the right. Grove of Trees was an old farmhouse that I grew up in. That's Progress Road. We're about a mile from the Columbia River, largest river in the Pacific Northwest. Here's a junction with Highway 730. This is a fairly busy highway that connects communities like Walla Walla, Washington, Spokane, with cities east or west of here, largest being Portland and the Oregon coast. This area is historically noted for the Lewis and Clark expedition in the 1800s. They came through here on their exploratory trip to the Oregon coast. Turning off here to Hat Rock State Park. Hat Rock is named for the large pillar rock located in front of me, which looks like a pioneer's hat. When we were kids, we used to climb that rock. Lucky we didn't fall off, but we didn't. This is a fairly popular state park for particularly use by local residents. Nice picnic areas and water. And here comes Hat Rock up on the left. The GoPro camera is a fairly wide angle, so it appears to be, Hat Rock appears to be quite a ways away, but we're right at the base of it, essentially. It's probably about 50 feet high. We'll go down here and turn around and take you on up the Columbia River, which now is a series of reservoirs, and the reservoir behind McNary Dam at Umatilla creates a lake called Lake Wallula. And at this point we are about a quarter of a mile from the Columbia River. We'll ride back out to Highway 730 and ride up the river for a few miles. This is an RV park located at Hat Rock, fairly popular for people traveling through the area. I love this bike because I can essentially go anywhere on it. It rides at full highway speeds, freeways, back gravel roads, dirt trails, back home again. Makes a good beginner's bike, which is essentially my first motorcycle. Learned to ride it, another one just like it anyway, and when I turned 70 years old. My friend Chris talked me into getting it because he figured that's the style of bike I needed to do what I wanted to do. Here we are turning off on Highway 37 and dropping down into another recreation area called Warehouse Beach, managed by the Corps of Engineers. As you can see, this bike handles very nicely on gravel roads. Here's a sign that shows it's the Lewis and Clark Commemorative Trail. And here's the Warehouse Beach Recreation Area on the Columbia River, or in this case it's Lake Wallula. It gets a lot of use in the summer. It gets very hot here, so there's a swimming area here on the river, and people can come down here and swim for free. I'm taking you back into a little boat launch where we duck hunters launch our boats and hunt ducks. Very popular area. This area is right in the middle of the Pacific Flyway, so we get large concentrations of waterfowl in this region in the fall. And there's the boat launch. We'll ride back out to Highway 730 and continue up the river going east. We're at the junction of Highway 37 and 730. Pulling back onto Highway 730. I'll pull off up here in a little recreation area called the Sandstone Recreation Area, or Sand Station Recreation Area. Used to be a lot of folks would camp here full time through the summer season, but they've prohibited full-time camping here, so now it's just a day use area. Has some nice sandy beaches, good bird watching area. Water skiers particularly like this area because they can beach their boats and sit on the sandy beaches in the sun and water ski. That's what I used to do back in the 1950s when I was a kid. It's a busy highway for this area, so got to be kind of careful. At this point, we're about 10 miles east of Umatilla, Oregon, pulling off on a siding here to point out the large pump stations located on the river that pump water from the river up onto the plateau and to large agricultural areas watered with circle sprinkler irrigation. That technology was developed in the 1960s here and opened up a lot of the country to high-value agriculture, which now is the foundation for the local economy. Continuing east on Highway 730, we're nearing the gorge area on the Columbia River. Geologists tell us that prehistorically, during the glacial period, there were large glaciers and lakes that were dammed by the glaciers up in Montana, one of which was on the Clark Fork River. And it would regularly pack up huge amounts of water and then break, allowing large amounts of water to come down through and carve this canyon out and spread large boulders across parts of eastern Washington. Through that gap ahead of me is Wallula, and at Wallula is a junction which you can either go north towards Tri-Cities and Spokane or east to Walla Walla and points further east. Pulling off here at Juniper Canyon. This is one of the major canyons off the south side of the river. It goes for miles up towards Pendleton, Oregon. This is all part of the McNairy National Wildlife Refuge, managed by the Fish and Wildlife Service. As on the Umatilla Wildlife Refuge, there are large concentrations of waterfowl in the fall and early winter. Now we're headed back west on Highway 730 towards Umatilla. This highway connects with Interstate 84 west of Umatilla and Oregon. 84 will take you on into Portland, Oregon, and connect with Interstate 5 that goes north and south through Washington and Oregon and California. This is a pretty good view of the Columbia River, Lake Wallula. We're back to the junction with the diagonal highway that goes back into Hermiston. And I'm going to turn off here on Pumpkin Center Road and take you into the north end of Hermiston. We'll drive down through the business district in Hermiston and show you the area where I live. Lots of small farms out in this part of town. Pulling up to Highway 395, which goes north out of Hermiston, and we'll be turning south. Yeah, this is kind of the north end of town. Like other communities in eastern Oregon and Washington, there are a lot of franchise businesses that you may be familiar with throughout the West and maybe even into the Midwest. It's only about 3 miles through the entire town, going north and south, and about the same going east and west. It's not a real large town. tried making this recording earlier, but didn't have the microphone hooked up, so I redid it. I'm narrating it from my office instead of during the ride. This is a good area to retire to since the cost of living is relatively low. Living in the large cities on the west coast would be quite a bit more expensive than living here. And it's a great area for riding motorcycles. Lots of paved roads, lots of county gravel roads, farm roads, dirt roads. We're only about 50 miles from the national forest trails for riding up there. So I've ridden down in Arizona, and I much prefer riding down here. More to see, more places to go. Okay, we're going to turn east on Main Street into what was the main business district back in the 1950s. Most of what I've showed you to this point did not exist when I was a small kid. And here's Main Street. This is an older part of town that now is going to be revitalized, and part of it turned into pedestrian malls for local festivals. Should make a very attractive area for businesses in Hermiston. Coming up on the left is an old two-story house, which was the original hospital for Hermiston. Many of us in my age group that grew up here were born there. We're at 10th and Main, headed in the Highland Summit subdivision. And we're back home. I hope you enjoyed the ride.